Welcome and thank you all for joining us today. We're very happy to be back with a special region-specific edition of our COVID update webinar. I will make a few technical notes about the GoToWebinar platform before we begin today. So on your webinar panel, this is the blue or orange flower icon on your screen. You'll see a section called Handouts. This is where you can open, save the presentation, follow along, or look back on the information at a later date. There's also a section called Questions where you can enter your questions for our panelists today. We try to answer as many questions either through the chat box direct to you or during our live Q&A session towards the end. Following today's webinar, please take a moment to complete our short survey to let us know your experience today. As well, you will receive a recording of this session tomorrow by email. And with that, I will now introduce Laura Jones, our Executive Vice President and Chief Strategic Officer. Thank you, Laura.
Oh, thank you so much, Alexa, and welcome everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what part of the West you're joining us from today. And Manitoba, yes, we include you in the West. And so we are really excited to be here. We've been having these webinars very regularly since COVID started in order to keep our members updated on the latest developments with respect to program support and restrictions, and just keep you up to date. It's like drinking from a fire hose with what's going on across Canada, both at the federal level and also at the provincial level. And on a couple webinars ago, it was suggested that having a more regional focus would be really helpful. So that's what we're doing today. And so this webinar is focused on Western Canada. I'm joined by my very capable colleagues, Corinne Pullman, Rachel Ng, Keely Kosarek, Janice Storazak. Janice, I probably just butchered your last name, even though, because I just know you as Janice for all these years. But my capable colleagues are here to help. We're going to get to as many of your questions as we can. And for those of you, I would just want to say a special welcome. We've got some new people who have never been on these webinars before. And so special welcome to you. And on the next slide, just for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we have a website where our information is regularly updated. And we use the questions that we get on these webinars, as well as the questions that we get through our helplines, to keep this website updated. So it really is business owner questions. So it's a wealth of really good information worth checking out if you have questions, and if you're worried about what the latest news is, this is a place to go. But in addition to that, often it's helpful to get information where you can go back and forth in real time with a live person. And we of course have that too. And I'm really happy to have Janice joining us today. As many of you are familiar with Rachel and Brendan, but you haven't met Janice yet. She works in our Western with our Western team on counseling. And if you call our number, you will get one of our counselors. You are welcome to do that, and I will put that number up again at the end of the webinar just so that you've got it. And I'll just remind you that, as Alexa just said, if you want to download the webinar episode, the handout from the episode, it is right there on the right-hand side of your screen, and you're welcome to do that, of course. So if we go to the next slide, I like to always start these webinars with a few quotes, because we've been in difficult times now for well over a year, and in difficult times I think it's important to lean on inspiration wherever you can get it. And so some nice quotes here. I particularly like the one about people often say that motivation doesn't last. Well, neither does bathing. That's why we recommend it daily. So finding that daily dose of inspiration wherever you can get it, I think, is important. Particularly, the last part of a race always feels like the toughest, and that elusive finish line on COVID and getting back to a more normal feeling is, it's challenging to be this close and yet feeling like we're this far away. And business owners, you guys have been, right up there with obviously healthcare, and those people who are directly affected by COVID itself are on the front lines, but business owners are not far behind that in terms of some of the challenges that you've been facing with COVID. So from there, let's go to the next slide, and we are going to cover some federal, what's new, but we'll keep that a bit light today. Corinne will review a little bit about what was in the federal budget, and that's also in the appendix. If you missed 2 webinars ago, Corinne did a great job of going through what was in the federal budget. If you missed that and you really want some of those details, they're in the appendix. She'll probably mention that as well when she's going through it, but I just don't want people to miss that if they need it. And then we're really going to focus on the provincial restrictions and programs, what's going on in Western Canada, and then obviously get to as many of your questions as we possibly can. But before we do that, just a couple of quick additional slides before I turn it over to Corinne. So the next slide. Just a little COVID humor here. So again, I think I was flipping through some of the cartoons that have come out with respect to COVID from early in the pandemic to, where we are today. This is kind of where we are, not about a month ago. And it is interesting to look at it through that lens and bring a little bit of humor to a difficult situation. And then on the next slide, in addition to humor, I also wanted to bring some hope to the table today. And I know that when you're listening to the radio or reading the newspaper, the headlines are always the bad news, right? It's always whatever the most negative thing that's going on across Canada or around the world, that's what's getting people's attention. But I just did want to pull some good news that might not be the headline, but is very, very good news, is that vaccinations obviously have ramped up right across the country. And as of a couple of days ago, we were at well over 16 million. We're now today close to 17 million doses. So I think we're at 16,900,000 as of yesterday. So I expect we'll be higher than 17 as of today. So this is very good news. And in many parts of the country, we're over 50% of the eligible population. So this is going to start to have an impact. And we know that from looking at the UK and other countries like the US, other countries that are a little bit ahead of us on this, that better times are not far away, given what we're seeing here. So I just wanted to interject a little bit of good news there. And then this is where I'm going to ask Corinne to join me, and she's going to walk us through some of what's happening federally, and then I will be back in a few minutes and we'll introduce Keely and Janice. If she wants to join us, we'll jump in as well.
Great. Thanks, Laura, and hello, everybody. I'm glad that you have come back or joined us for the first time. Welcome. So I just wanted to touch on a few things federally before we jump into the regional stuff. First is that the budget bill, what we call Bill C-30, has been introduced in the House. Just a reminder that the budget included lots and lots of information, as Laura mentioned. In the appendix, you'll get a bit more of a broader overview of what's in the budget, as well as some details and some key features. For example, the extension of the rent subsidy and wage subsidy till the end of September is one of the key features, and it gets into some of the calculations and how that's actually going to work over time. Also, the hiring incentive, there is the idea that starting in June, if you are hiring net new people in the business, you may be able to get a bit of a subsidy for that. And also this idea of immediate expensing. The government did announce that you can get up to $1.5 million expensed in the year of purchase if you purchase capital over the course of the next, I think it's up until 2023. These are all new initiatives that were in the budget, among many others. All of them are in the particular budget bill that has been introduced. They usually do 2 bills, one in the spring, one in the fall. These are all in this one for the spring. Some of the details we may not quite get till it's closer to the end or it's gone through the whole legislative process. But having said that, we also know that existing programs like the rent subsidy and the wage subsidy don't have to wait for the bill to go through. They will start implementing whatever was in the budget when the date comes up. I believe the next period for the wage and rent subsidy starts around June 5th. So even if the budget bill hasn't passed by then, they will continue with the process that they had already set out in the budget for those particular initiatives. So I just want to give you that update. It is moving forward. We are hearing people having more and more concerns with the fact that the rent subsidy and the wage subsidy will start going down as of July. And given some situations in various parts of Canada, including many parts of Western Canada, there are still businesses that are under various restrictions, particularly in Manitoba and Alberta, I believe. That's going to actually create more hardship for them if we start moving out of the wage subsidy. So we'd love to hear your feedback about whether it's time for the wage subsidy and the rent subsidy to be lowered, or whether or not it's something you think that maybe it's a bit too soon given the many restrictions that are still in place.
Corinne, I just had to jump in here with Tim's comment because it's exactly on this point. Tim's an audio-visual rental business based in BC and serving larger meetings and conferences, and that's not going to be permitted. Well, in BC, it sounds like for the rest of the year. We'll see how that, you know, may change, but that looks to be right. And really worried about the CEWS being, it needs to be continued at current rates. I know you're hearing lots of that, but I know these kinds of comments are also really helpful. So thank you, Tim. We will take that on, and then I'll come back. Tim's second part of his comment is about a safe reopening plan for BC, which we totally agree that we need more clarity around that stuff, but we'll bring that back when we're talking about those programs. I just wanted to say we're hearing lots of this. As an example.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, for sure. And thank you, Tim, for that as well, because definitely we're hearing a lot from folks that are in sort of around the event space or meeting space type of businesses in particular, or even tourism. That's where we're hearing a lot of concern around these. But please share with us your thoughts on that as well, because we are looking to build a strategy around this to potentially push government a little bit more on maybe not moving as quickly towards starting to reduce those subsidies right now. Also wanted to just touch on the CEBA, Canada Emergency Business Account expansion loans. As you may recall, there's the original 40,000. They did expand it to another 20,000, half of that 20,000 being forgivable. There is a group of businesses who had applied for this loan back in December, along with everybody else, but has still not been able to get it because there was a discrepancy between what their application said and what the original and some of the findings in their own. For example, their CRA business number was slightly different in their application than CRA has it, or something along those lines. And those folks have been very, very patient in trying to get a fix for that. The government has said that they will fix it, that they will have a way that these businesses can go in and potentially fix it to see if they are eligible. Unfortunately, that still hasn't been put into place. It's extremely frustrating, and I know it's frustrating. We hear from members almost every day on this. First thing I wanted to say, if you're in that situation, is you're not alone. There's literally thousands of other businesses in the same sort of category. What can you do right now? Well, we're continuing almost on a daily basis, pushing information over to the government to say you need to get this fixed now. We'll continue to do as much pressure as we can. Clearly, something's going on because it's now taken them 4 more months than they originally planned to do that. Make sure you're still in contact with your financial institution, because it is through them that you will get the information of when the fix is ready. So make sure you're letting them know that you're still waiting. And you know, if you have a story you want to share with us that you haven't yet, please do through our CFIB at CFIB.ca. The more stories we get, the more ability we can then put pressure on the government to say this is the impact your decisions are having. You need to get this out now. So I wish I had better news to share, but that's the situation we're in at the moment. If you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The other thing I wanted to just touch on briefly is the Highly Affected Sector Credit Availability Program, which is continuing to accept applications. It is open until at least the end of June. We are hearing rumors they may extend it beyond June as well. However, what we did want to say is that there are a few businesses that have run into some problems with the HASCAP loan that we wanted to clarify. We've actually been building a fairly good relationship with the Business Development Bank of Canada, which is sort of overseeing the loan. You do have to go through your financial institution in order to apply for the loan, but BDC is the one telling the banks how to run it. And they've been very actually helpful on sort of dealing with some of the issues that our members have run into with their financial institutions. So we've had more than a few examples of all of these. We just want to clarify right now with the HASCAP, and it is a loan, it's only a purely loan. It is at a 4% rate, it is a 10-year term. But you don't have to provide, it's also based on the viability of your business prior to the pandemic. So these are all fairly positive if for a loan program, though I know for many people getting a loan is not really the best option at the moment. But if you are in a position where you think this could be helpful, you should know that personal guarantees are not required for this particular loan, and you may be asked for personal information by your financial institution, but they cannot ask you to provide a personal guarantee. And if they do, you should call us and we can help you make sure that that is cleared from the application. Secondly, we've had some financial institutions suggest that the term is less than 10 years, it's maybe 5 years. The actual term is 10 years unless you as a business owner negotiate a lower term with your financial institution, but the standard is 10 years. Thirdly, there are 3 segments to the loan. So basically, there's the lowest segment is from 25,000 to 100,000. The second is 100 to 250,000, and then 250 up to $1 million is a third segment. So depending on the segment in which you apply, the amount of scrutiny that the bank will put into looking at your viability as a business and your probability of default gets higher and higher and higher. If you're trying to get a fairly large loan and they turn you down for those reasons, you should be able to apply for a lesser loan at segment 2 or segment 1, because the amount of information and the amount of and the probability of default becomes less of an issue on those lower loans. So always ask if you're trying at a higher level and it doesn't work, that maybe you can try at a lower level. Some banks aren't providing those options. We want to make sure you're aware of it. And finally, the only information really required from the FI really depends on the segment that you're in. And that segment, again, will dictate how much information they need to get from you to understand your probability of default. Beyond that, the only other thing the bank's going to really need is that whatever information you provided in your wage subsidy or rent subsidy applications, because you have to apply for one or the other or both in order to apply for the HASCAP loan as well, because they use the data on the revenue loss from that to determine whether you're eligible for this one, which basically is that you have to have a 50% loss in revenue over the last at least 3 months over the last 8 months in order to apply for this loan. If you still have questions, or if you still need more information or clarity, or having problems, please call our business counselors. They know about this. We have good contacts. We can help you on this particular issue. All right. And again, just a reminder, all kinds of details in the appendix on the budget if you need it. So next slide, we'll bring Laura back to talk about one of our national federal petitions that we're working on around the rent subsidy.
Thanks, Corinne. And I think you know, one of the important, there are many different fronts we're now fighting on, and I just heard from so many event businesses a minute ago about how important the supports are going forward, and that we keep them at a reasonably high level while they're still shut down. So that's another petition that we're likely to put together. So that we can get your stories, because when people hear when politicians hear your specific stories, your comments, how it's affecting you, it makes a very different impact than us just saying, look, there are thousands of businesses in this situation. So those stories really bring it alive, and we do that through our petitions. And I just wanted to give you an example of some of what we're doing. The rent petition is up. This is because through these webinars, we've heard from so many of you who are locked out of rent relief. You maybe own your building and then you operate your business out of the same building, so you're not eligible. There are a number of other situations where businesses are not eligible. So this petition is available for you to check off. And what I've put, I don't expect you to read that font of the letter there. It's really just to show you, what do we do with your feedback? So you fill in the petition, and then we take it and we put it into letters, we put it into op-eds and press releases, and there's a tweet there you see on the right of the screen that then can be retweeted and amplified. And that's how we get your positions, your ideas, your stories, our ideas for how to fix these programs into government. So if you haven't signed this petition and you feel locked out of rent relief, and that includes those of you who feel that rent relief might not go on long enough or isn't at a high enough level, you can click, there's an other there, and just your story is really what we need. With these letters, we're pulling some of the comments. We've already sent several letters to Freeland, but we're pulling the comments and getting them into the MPs. So we're really trying to activate the backbench. So the more we get and the more we can say, here are 3 comments. We don't put your names, it's anonymous, but here are 3 comments from businesses in your riding. That makes a big impact. So just a bit of a plug for our petitions. We've got a petition page, so this isn't the only one up there, but this is just an example I wanted to share with everybody. And with that, I believe we're bringing Keely, Keely onto the, we just did Ontario, Ryan's Ontario, Keely's West. Sorry, Keely, you're not the new Ryan. So Keely's gonna walk us through what's going on in Western Canada. And Janice, please feel free to pop up if you wanna add anything, and Keely will bring you into the conversation where needed.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. So I will be going over what's going on in Western Canada. So this covers BC through Manitoba. And I'm going to start off with the business restrictions. And I'm going to show them all at once just so we can compare and contrast what's happening across the 4 provinces. So maybe you don't feel so alone in your own province. Large events, for the most part, are still not permitted across all 4 of the Western provinces, as well as travel restrictions are in place. So all 4 provinces are recommending non-essential travel should be avoided. BC, in its most recent round of restrictions, has implemented a non-essential travel ban between different public health regions. And Manitoba is the only of the 4 provinces that requires a 14-day quarantine if you are traveling within provinces. So of course there is a 14-day mandatory quarantine if you're traveling internationally, but just in Manitoba is the 14-day quarantine if you're going between provinces. So starting on the coast with BC, restaurants. We had some new restrictions in BC since the last time I was on here. Restrictions in BC are in place until at least just after the May long weekend. So that's what we know at this point. As for restaurants, indoor dining is closed, but patio, takeout, delivery is still good to go. Retail, it remains open, but with limited occupancy. And personal services are allowed. As for the fitness sector, gyms and indoor fitness are not permitted, but one-on-one training and group fitness is still running in BC. So for Alberta, restrictions are also in place until just after the long weekend, as far as we know for now. Unfortunately, in the most recent round of restrictions, we did see our patio shut down. So right now, only takeout and delivery are permitted in Alberta at this time. Retail capacity was reduced once again, so now we're at a 10% capacity for retail. And despite some of our best efforts to push the government to keep personal services open by appointment only, they are now closed until at least after the May long weekend. And fitness was another big one that took a bunch of restrictions in this last round. All forms of fitness are closed in the province. That includes outdoor fitness classes. Saskatchewan could see their restrictions lifted as early as next week. They're in place until at least May 17th. Restaurants are open with the exception of Regina, and they're limited to 4 people per table. Retail is still limited in Saskatchewan to 50%, big box capacity is at 25%. Personal services are open at 50% occupancy, and gyms are open with physical distancing in place, and group fitness is allowed as long as you have 8 or fewer people. And Manitoba just was hit with another round of restrictions just within the last week here, and they are in place until at least the end of the month from what we know right now. Retail is limited to 10% or 100 people, so whichever is lower in your case. Manitoba did join Alberta in closing down personal services in this round. As for fitness, gyms, indoor group training, and one-on-one training are not permitted, but outdoor fitness is allowed as long as you have 5 people or less. So moving on from business restrictions, we will start with an overview of the support programs that are in place in each province. And I believe each province has changed slightly since our last regional webinar, so I'll try and highlight what's new since the last time we spoke. The Circuit Breaker Grant Program was announced in BC, and this was in response to the most recent round of restrictions. So the program offers $2,000 to $20,000 for the hospitality, fitness, and accommodation businesses that were impacted by the most recent round of restrictions. The applications do close on June 4th, so we don't have a huge window left to apply, so make sure you get your application in soon. The application process for this program is similar to a previous program, but a little bit more involved with the documents that you have to upload. We're aware of this and we are pushing the government to simplify, but if you do need any help, be sure to call our helpline. We've been walking members through the application for this. Next slide, please. So the Small and Medium Business Recovery Grant, this one's been in place for a while, $10,000 to $30,000. Applications are still open until the end of August, but it is dependent on how much of the funds are used up. So get your application in sooner rather than later. And with this program, it is noteworthy that there's an extra $5,000 to $15,000 for businesses in the tourism sector. And one last program for BC. Next slide, please. Is the Launch Online Grant Program. So this program is still open also until the end of September. $7,500 for updating or creating your online shop. The one kick to this program is that you must have not spent the money already. So unfortunately, it's no good for businesses who have already invested in their online shops at the beginning of the pandemic. We've raised this with the government, but I recommend that you start with the other two programs first. And then come to this one and see if there is any way that you're eligible for this one, but it is also an option. And moving on to Alberta's support. So the last time we had a regional webinar, we had talked about a new program in Alberta, and it was called the Enhanced COVID Support Program. But with the new round of restrictions, the program got completely axed, so we'll forget about all of that. And the government has reverted back to the SME relaunch grant. So this is the program that's been in place for some time. They have opened up the third payment of the program. And there has been some misconception on our phone lines that the program is only for businesses who are closed. But I'm here to tell you that nearly every Alberta business should be eligible as long as you have a 30% revenue loss. The government is being very lenient in the applications for businesses to prove that they are impacted by the pandemic. Really, that's the only requirement. One note about this program is that the first and second rounds are now closed. So you can no longer apply for those rounds. We continue to push the government to reopen applications for these payments. The application deadline is the end of May, so don't delay in applying because that's coming up very shortly. We have asked the government to extend the deadline. We also have a lot of members calling our helpline wondering why they haven't received their payment, even if they applied on the first day, and I believe it was April 23rd. We have been in close contact with the government on this program. They are telling us that there's still a major backlog from when the second and first rounds were open. We have been told that they've hired more staff to work through the application, so hang tight is what we're being told right now. Feel free to call our business resources line if you're a business owner who still has yet to receive their payment for the first and second rounds. We are hoping that they're moving in the right direction, but things are slow on that front. In Alberta, we have also requested that the government implement another program to target hospitality, so restaurants, fitness, personal services, similar to what's been done in BC with the Circuit Breaker Grant Program. We have been told that they are looking at their options. We do have a new Alberta petition online. It's CFIB.ca/petitions is where you can find that new Alberta specific petition. All right, next slide, please. Moving on to Saskatchewan, the Reopening Training Subsidy is the newest program in Saskatchewan. Basically, business owners can be reimbursed 100% for any training that their employees take part in. So part of the training costs are paid up front, and then the rest is paid once the training has been completed. The application deadline is the end of June. It's a really beneficial program if you've had to innovate and pivot a little bit with your business due to COVID. So far, the application seems fairly straightforward to us. We haven't had too much feedback on it at this point. But if you do go through the application and get stuck, please call our helpline. We want to know where the sticking points are on this program as it's so new. Next slide, please. Saskatchewan's Emergency Payment Program. So this program has been in place for a while now. Applications for the April payment are open until the end of the month. So you can receive another $5,000 per business. The program has been fairly well received, and I am understanding that the application process is fairly straightforward, so please do get your applications in for this round before the end of the month. Moving on to Manitoba, next slide. The Manitoba Bridge Grant. So with another round of restrictions being announced last week, the province also did announce a fourth payment of the bridge grant. So they're offering $5,000 or up to $5,000 and an additional $2,000 for restaurants. Basically, there is no application for this program. So if you applied in the previous rounds of the program, then you can expect to receive the fourth payment as early as tomorrow, is what we're being told. Our sticking point with the government is that if you did not apply for the previous rounds, there's no way for you to access the fourth payment. So we are pushing for them to reopen the applications once again, but those who have already applied should see that money fairly shortly. Moving on to the next slide. And we are done with the support programs, and we are going to move on towards what has become a hot button issue for CFIB and our members over the last week or so. We've seen several provinces implement government paid sick days. So in the West, these provinces are BC and Manitoba. So to start with BC, this is coming soon. The legislation has not yet passed, but when it does, employees can take up to 3 sick days up until the end of the year, so December 31st. And employers will be reimbursed up to $200. So the employers will be reimbursed through WorkSafe, but the details are not out yet, and they will not be out till June. But as soon as we have details, once the legislation's passed, and once we know how you will be reimbursed, we will be sure to let you know. At the same time that the government announced these paid sick days, they also announced that the government is going to hold a consultation on permanent paid sick days. And this is obviously concerning to us because this would be a new cost for employers to bear. So we're keeping our eyes close to this file. We've already written a letter with our concerns. We'll be sure to participate in any upcoming consultations, and I'm sure you'll see lots from us in BC in the coming months with regards to this. In Manitoba, with the new restrictions, Manitoba did announce paid sick days as well. So starting on May 7th, so just back a week, employers can be reimbursed up to $600 per employee for that employee to take up to 5 days of sick time. So this includes everything from testing to getting a vaccine to isolating and actual sick time. The program will be administered through economic development, and applications, we are told, are going to be open tomorrow. So if you've already had employees take sick days, make sure you check in to those applications and apply to get your reimbursement. And moving on to the next slide. Paid vacation leave. So this is another common thing that we're seeing across the West. In Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, the governments have all implemented up to 3 hours of paid leave paid for by the employer for their employees to receive a COVID vaccination. So you are not able to, as the employer, ask for proof of vaccination, but you can ask for a proof of employment. This is a common question, or sorry, proof of appointment. This is a common question that we are getting through our helplines. So you can ask for the proof of appointment. And it's very similar, what we're telling our members is similar to being paid for voting time. Similar process there. Moving on to the next slide. I just included some common questions that we're getting in the West through our helpline. We've talked a lot on previous webinars about what to do when an employee tests positive, so I've just added some reminders there. Another question is, can I enforce my employees to get a vaccination? This has also been touched on. We're working on a policy with a law firm, but in the meantime, just give a call to our helpline and we'll be sure to walk you through that. Another common concern across the country is that construction materials are skyrocketing. We are aware of this. We want to hear from our members. Our national team is working on this and working on a response. So the more stories that we have the more stories that we have, the better, so that we can form our response to this. And another common question is, will restrictions go beyond their current date? So we are hopeful, with cases are going down in most Western provinces, with the exception of Manitoba, vaccines are picking up. We should be heading in the right direction. But while we would like to see restrictions lifted, it has become common for governments to extend restrictions beyond the first end date that they give. So we are pushing for data-driven restrictions and applicable support for any businesses that are impacted by the restrictions. Last slide, please. And vaccines. So like I said, vaccines are picking up across all the Western provinces. We are seeing some really good numbers. BC has 40% of the population with 1 dose. Alberta has 7% with 2 doses, which is exciting. So I included some links to government's vaccine plans. In BC, as long as you're 18 up, Alberta 12 up, Saskatchewan 26 and older, and Manitoba 18 and older, you should be eligible, or your employees should be eligible at this time to book a vaccine. So we encourage you to look into those and see when your time is up. And that is all it from me.
Other than sign the petitions, we put a great we've got to put a great plug here for our petition page, and we've got both the federal petitions that apply to all businesses across Canada, but also we have some provincial specific ones. So go to our petition page and sign these. They're great. It's yet another way to get your voice in. We do our research surveys and we get those out. We do the petitions and of course your calls and our advocacy feed, our advocacy meetings as well. And with that, I think we go to our last page, and I'll ask everybody, I'll ask Corinne to come back and join us, and Janice, you're welcome to join as well if you want, or you can hang out in the background and answer questions, whatever suits. And just put up the number again for anyone who wants to give us a call. And we have opened up the webinars just this week for some of you who are on this webinar may not actually be members of CFIB, but we have opened our helplines to all businesses during the pandemic. So obviously we have priority to our members, but we are open to all members. So if you want to give that a try, that's a resource that is open to you. And I think we have lots of questions that have come in. Interesting, there was a comment on the construction piece that you mentioned, Keely, from Tim, who's an electrical contractor, and just saying the rise in cost of goods is totally unacceptable, and what can we do to address this? Of course, it's difficult. I know there are a lot of economists who are people are on different pages with respect to inflation, because of course predicting the future and prices, we'd all be rich if we really knew what was going to happen. But lots of people saying they expect this to be temporary, and as some of the supply chain issues get worked out and as things ramp up again, but that doesn't mean it's not difficult. And Corinne, I know you and the team are looking at what should we be doing, and it does feed, of course, our lobbying to keep taxes reasonable, regulatory costs reasonable, property taxes reasonable, because when other costs are going up, that's difficult, particularly with respect to recovery. Also, lots of comments, Corinne, through my question box here on the need to maintain that CERS and SUS, and lots of businesses who are still very shut down, who are dependent on events. Lots of people agreeing with Tim, so that's super. I've been telling everyone thank you for those comments, really valuable as we feed that into our legislative work. And what are you getting in your inbox, Corinne? And then I'll go to you, Keely. I'll give you a minute to look at what you've got there.
Lots of questions on HASCAP, so that's great. I'm glad that people are interested. A few of them have had some issues with HASCAP, and I'm actually in the background trying to work through those issues with some of our other colleagues on the federal side. So we're doing our best to help some folks who've already run into some issues on the HASCAP loan side of the equation. So again, around personal guarantees, somebody said they weren't asked for a personal guarantee, but they were asked for a corporate guarantee. And so they want to know if that's still valid. And in fact, I came to learn as I was in the background trying to get information that we're actually waiting for confirmation from BDC on that right now. Likely they will be able to ask you for a corporate guarantee, but we are waiting to get some confirmation on that. So we'll have more to share hopefully in the near future on that front. So that's been the bulk of mine. The only other thing I'm going to add though is one of the folks that had reached out about the HASCAP loan also went on to say that this is from Kristen. She says, just to note too, what Keely just mentioned about the Alberta petition for hospitality and fitness businesses, it would be great to include the entertainment industry in that as well. So there you go, Keely, just another, you know, again, someone in the event industry, it is a sector that has often been overlooked, but it's been definitely shut down for probably most of the last year. So it's one we need to continue to make sure we're supporting.
Excellent, thanks, Corinne. Keely, what have you got in your question pile that you'd like to put to the group here?
Sure. So I will just thank Lisa for raising that BC has also legislated the 3-hour leave. So I did leave that off the slide, but so that means all 4 provinces have allowed employees to leave for up to 3 hours to go get their vaccine paid for by the employer. So thanks for reminding us, Lisa, and we will make sure that is up to date on our website.
Thanks, Keely. Anything else you want to address? So while you're looking to see if there's anything else in your bucket, maybe I'll take on because this came up in our Atlantic webinar earlier, but questions about vaccine policy and what to do if your employees don't want to get vaccinated, which is obviously really tricky territory. And you mentioned that we are going back and forth with a lawyer right now to try and come up with a policy so that you guys don't have to do that all by yourselves. Like, what should our vaccine policy be? How do we deal with this? We know this is really tricky. And the 2 things we're not quite, we've gone back and forth a few times on it with the lawyer, we're not quite finished, but 2 pieces of it are, you know, one, it's fine to encourage your employees to get vaccines. It's not clear yet where the lines are going to be around mandating this, and we felt that our businesses by and large would be more comfortable with encouraging. So that's the language we put in our policy. But the second thing is also encouraging people to tell you if they're not going to get vaccinated, because then you may have to take some alternative, you may have to continue to use PPE in the business, whatever it is. And obviously it depends very much on the kind of business, you know, how you're engaging with your customers, all of that. And this is this is where public policy is still evolving, right? We don't know what the government requirements are going to be around this, and you know, different people have different sensibilities, and there's the human rights piece. So where all of this is going to land is I think going to be evolving for quite some time. But we are working on a policy for those of you who might want one for your business, and so stay tuned for that soon, because I know that's coming through on our helplines. Quite a few questions on that. One question from Robert here: now that most provinces will approach 50% and better vaccinated, is there any talk about removing restrictions for people or businesses that can demonstrate vaccinations of their employees? And so I'm happy to weigh in on that, but Corinne or Keely, if you do you want to take that one first?
There hasn't been too much talk about it in Alberta, but there has been talk about the rapid testing program in Alberta. So the Alberta government just a couple weeks ago announced their rapid testing program, where business owners can apply to get a rapid test kit in their business. So we are hoping that if that picks up and vaccines pick up, that maybe we can start to look towards removing restrictions in some of these businesses. I will let you know that Alberta is having a webinar the CFIB team in Alberta is having a webinar with the government of Alberta next week. You should have received an email from us on that. So if you're interested in the rapid testing, look out for that email. If you missed it, just give us a call and we'll make sure that you get the invitation to that webinar to find a bit more about that.
It's a good point, Keely, and rapid testing, I think, is a really important part of the strategy for those that don't want to get vaccinated and for whatever reason. So how do we pull that into the, how do we pull that into the public policy? There's some talk about vaccine passports. That's been very controversial, including among our membership. And we've got a comment here from a member saying, please fight for those of us that don't want to get vaccinated, from Jorge. And so people are a little bit all over the place on this, and how we can come up with reasonable policies to keep people safe while protecting human rights, I think, is going to be as I said, a frontier on this that we're all going to be grappling with. Other questions that are coming through, I'm seeing a few more in mine. So Donna is just making the point that really impacted with seasonality in a yogurt shop, so you can imagine that. And winter sales as low as 50% and lower, and then during the warm weather, those go up. And so any thoughts on how seasonal businesses are to make it through this coming winter when all help is reduced or considerably removed is her question. Corinne, I don't know if you want to, because I know you've been really thinking a lot about the seasonal component for businesses.
Yeah, because it's been an issue right from the beginning, to be honest. Because the way most seasonal businesses work, of course, is you have a high season during the summer and then not much during, say, the winter months. And so it's very difficult sometimes to show that you've actually had revenue losses over the course of those periods, and especially during the off periods. So we have raised this countless times with government. They are aware that this is an issue. I think they grapple with, they don't really know how to fix it. And I think that's a bit of what we're facing. So, we have to be creative also about coming up with ideas on what they can think about in terms of, the months that they're open or the way that they do these programs, or maybe look at a different formula. Fortunately, things like CEBA don't necessarily have a seasonality to them, but the wage subsidy does, and certainly the rent subsidy does. So that's where the issues do come in. So at least there is something there, but we continue to raise it as an issue. We will continue to raise it as an issue, as something that they need to look at. I also hope that by getting some movement on debt forgiveness, for example, that's another area that we've heard a lot of concerns with. And so if we're pushing governments to come up with ways to help businesses deal with their debt, and hopefully that could be another thing that may eventually be able to help some of those businesses that may be more seasonal in nature and are not able to necessarily get the subsidies on a monthly basis the way other businesses can. So we haven't forgotten about you. It's definitely something that's still on our radar. It's just been a challenge to try to get governments to figure out a solution up to this point.
And I'll note that almost every provincial program that I did review today, they have worked in some aspect for newer businesses or seasonal businesses. So the provinces have been a lot more successful in that aspect than the federal programs have been. So I know they're not quite as substantial as the federal programs, but certainly do take a look at those if that's you, because there are some workarounds for these types of businesses.
And I know for a lot of our members, and we talked about this on the Ontario and on the Quebec and Atlantic webinar, a lot of members have gone first to the federal programs, and that absolutely made sense. And then and sometimes not really looking at the provincial programs because just dealing with the federal ones is a lot of work, but hopefully we've shed some light on some of the ones that might be helpful at this point, and making sure you don't miss the application deadline, for example, on the ones that might benefit your business. And again, I know you said it multiple times, Keely, but phoning our VR counselors, they can help walk you through if you're struggling. You don't have to do it alone. Corinne, I just wanted to make Marcy's comment public, because I think it's really really an important one for our, as we think this through in our legislative work. Something very important in the event industry is to ensure that the government realizes that even when they start relaxing restrictions, events do not walk in the next day like fitness or restaurant. You know, most events are booked months in advance, so there's a huge lag from when they're able to start hosting events to when the events actually occur and generate revenue. And I think that this also speaks to the need, particularly as vaccines are more available, and we've seen in other jurisdictions that the cases start to really fall when you get to a certain vaccination rate. Really speaks to the need to push for some more concrete dates and targets around these things, because the uncertainty is just absolutely brutal, you know, for businesses, and so that's something we'll mention. The other thing I wanted to mention is, Corinne, I believe you said it was the 28th. One of the webinars we have been trying to line up for a while is with public health. And so to get some more, you know, that's obviously not an area of our expertise, but to get public health on these webinars to help answer some questions from, and it's breaking news that I think we now have that booked for the, is it the 28th that we're holding?
Yeah, we're holding the 28th of May. This will be the Public Health Agency of Canada. So it'll be a bit of a different beast than the public health officials that you may have provincially. So their jurisdiction's a bit different, but I think that they can still help answer a lot of questions, especially around vaccines and what does that mean going forward and that kind of thing. So, but less so on the restriction side, more on the how does the rollout look like, what can happen after that kind of thing.
And I'm excited about that from two perspectives. One, obviously, to get you the information that you need from public health, but also from them for them to hear directly from business owners. I don't think there's been enough of that connection. I know some jurisdictions have done better than others. Keely, I know in Alberta they do roundtables with business owners. In BC they're doing it with the association heads, and so you know we're getting some intel from Bonnie Henry here on the ground. So different jurisdictions have taken different approaches to it, but I think federally, I think it's really important, that connection between business and public health, because they've been so focused on one element of the pandemic, but obviously it has those other implications. Okay, so I am not seeing any more questions in my box, but you guys might have some more, and maybe what we'll do is we'll start wrapping up, so feel free, we're not at time yet, but if you have other questions, and feel free, for those of you on the webinar, if you have other questions, feel free to get them in, and we'll take the next 7 minutes that we've got left, and we'll kind of answer some more questions and wrap up. And yeah, so Corinne, maybe I'll go to you first to see if there's any more in your box that you want to answer.
I do not have any more in my box. I am good, but yeah, so we'll leave it at that for now, but we're listening and hearing and want you to know that I heard a lot today about the event industry. I've heard a lot about the fact that people maybe want to see a delay in those wage subsidies and rent subsidies coming down. And of course, some of the issues people have had with the HASCAP loan has also been coming up. So those are all things that we'll continue to work on for sure.
Great. Thanks, Corinne. Keely, any last questions and then a wrap-up comment from you?
Yeah, certainly. I have one left in my inbox. From Myra, and she noticed that we didn't include the BC Employment Incentive Tax Credit. So certainly this is something for business owners in BC to be aware of. We have just included the main programs in each province. Of course, each province does have you know, other little perks and incentives for small business. I think about in Alberta, we had a WCB rebate. So things like that. Make sure that you're searching our website for all the small things as well. But I did just include the major support programs here today. But yeah, that's it from me today.
And any more wrap-up comments, just as we, any thoughts for going forward?
Yeah, so thanks everyone for your questions today. I think we've really been focused on our petitions and getting those comments in. So be sure as soon as the webinar is wrapped up today, if you have a minute, CFIB.ca/petitions, and check out what is available in your province for you to sign if there's a particular issue that's been a sticking point for your business throughout the pandemic. I encourage you to check those out.
So Jorge is sneaking in a last sort of question / comment for us, Corinne, on the travel restrictions, and travel business has lost about 95% of income revenue, and the government keeps talking about travel restrictions. And I know here in BC, we've heard from Bonnie Henry that border closure, for example, is going to probably be, you know, one of the things that's trickier to lift. And what we really need is the cases to come down, and then we can start amping up the, you know, the calls to lift the travel restrictions. But also you're working on support for those businesses. I mean, this speaks to the same category in a way as events, but I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, so in the budget, there was some extra money set aside for tourism businesses, I think especially those that may be relying on the border, for example. That details we don't have yet, so there may be some extra help coming if you are business dependent on that border that is now currently closed and will be, I guess, for some time. And or borders between provinces for that matter. Like those are also fairly restricted in many parts of Canada right now. So we'll continue to sort of advocate that all of these types of subsidies and programs and grants, or whatever it is that's there to help businesses through this, continue to be there as long as they cannot see anybody in person, as long as you have to be restricted in some form, and as long as the border remains closed, right? It's it wouldn't be fair to start removing all these restrictions, all of these subsidies or grants, yet the border remains closed, and businesses that are heavily reliant on that border are not able to basically function. So those are some of the key pieces of lobbying that we're doing at the moment to make sure that government understands that it's not just lifting certain restrictions in certain areas, it's basically reopening borders and allowing businesses to basically function like they once did. And sorry, I had the sunlight coming through my window, it keeps coming and going, so my apologies if the light keeps changing on me. So, but that would be definitely something that's high on our radar.
And you know, I heard yesterday that the domestic travel in the US is back up to 60%, like the air travel is back up to 60% of what it was pre-pandemic. In Canada, it's less than 10%. So there's definitely a gap there, and they are a bit ahead of us in terms of the vaccination, and their herd immunity was probably also quite a bit higher than ours, and their you know, the other factor they had is they have more ICU beds. So that combination sort of allowed the US, they're ahead of us in terms of where they're at in terms of reopening. But it does give you a sense of absolutely we're behind, but also where we're hopefully headed soon. As cases come down, hopefully. So fingers crossed. So yeah, so I guess I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'll maybe do something that almost unprecedented, which is end a webinar on time. We typically skate over, but we have smaller groups on these regional webinars. So I'll just end by saying a big thank you to Keely, Corinne, Janice, and also Alexa and Reem, who are in the background helping us with the get these webinars organized and together. We'll let you know when the next one is, but the 28th, as we said, is one we're hoping to get an invite out for soon with the Public Health Agency, so that should be a really interesting one. And I just also will maybe channel that back to that quotes page that I put up at the beginning, and that idea that, like bathing, getting some inspiration should be not a one and done event, but a kind of daily ritual, kind of like brushing your teeth. So yeah, so find that inspiration where you can. The last part of a race is always the toughest, and this last part feels like it's, you know, the finish line keeps getting a little bit further out and further out. I have to tell you, if I hear the next 2 weeks are critical one more time, I don't know what I'm going to do. I mean, that I think we're all sick of hearing that, and we've been hearing it for over a year. But there are some signs that we really are a lot closer to where we all are wanting to be. So hang in there, and we will continue to fight for you. Call us if you need us. We're here, and we will, with that, we'll call this webinar closed, and we will talk to you all again soon, I hope. Thanks, everyone.